The morning they poured concrete across my access road, I knew the HOA had finally lost its mind. I was halfway through replacing a radiator in my truck when I spotted the construction crew. Orange vests, jackhammers, and a cement mixer blocking the only gravel road that led from my workshop to the main road. I dropped my wrench, wiped my hands on my jeans, and jogged down the hill. "Hey, what the hell is this?" I shouted. A woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat turned toward me like she'd been waiting for this moment. Tall, wiry, and with a voice sharp enough to cut steel, Tiffany Keller. President of the Ridgemont Hills HOA, breaker of spirits, queen of petty rules. She was holding a clipboard like it was a sword. "This access road is not up to code," Tiffany said. "We're sealing it off for the safety of the community." "It's been here since the 70s, I snapped. "I use it to get to my house." "You don't even have jurisdiction over it. It crosses common HOA property, Mr. Kane," she said, flipping a page. "We voted, it's closed." I could feel my blood heating up. "My property deed includes an easement. You don't get to just decide this." Tiffany's eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe it's time we revise the easement agreement. I suggest you find another route." There was no other route. That road was the only way in and out of my lot without driving through 2 creeks and a neighbor's orchard. I clenched my jaw and turned around before I said something I'd regret. I wasn't about to let some clipboard tyrant strand me on my own land. That night, I dug up every document I had. Property deed, old county maps, the original easement agreement from when my dad first bought the lot. Sure enough, the easement gave me legal right-of-way through that stretch of land for access and egress in perpetuity. The next morning, I went to the county office. I needed answers. Turns out Tiffany wasn't just bluffing, she had convinced the HOA board to move forward with revoking my access via emergency vote, claiming it was a fire hazard. Total lie. But technically, the land the road passed through was HOA-owned, until I saw something strange. Right beside the HOA parcel was a thin strip of land, a sliver, maybe 10 feet wide, running parallel to the blocked road. It had been deeded separately decades ago. It wasn't owned by the HOA. It was owned by a defunct landscaping company that hadn't paid taxes in years. I asked the clerk, "Is that strip for sale?" She squinted at the screen. "Looks like it just went up for auction. Back taxes. You interested?" "Absolutely," I said. 2 weeks and $1,200 later, that strip of land was mine. And I had the surveyor line it up. Turns out it ran exactly along the old easement route. I paved it, myself. One weekend, a rented grader, a lot of gravel, and some sweat. Then I put up a brand new gate, steel with a keypad. And a shiny sign that read, "Private access toll road $20 entry," and I didn't just block Tiffany and her HOA lapdogs. I built it so everyone in the northern half of Ridgemont Hills had to use it to reach the main road. I didn't charge everyone, only HOA board members. Every McMansion-loving, rule-mandating one of them, $20 to get out, $20 to get back in, and they paid every single time. Tiffany showed up at my gate a week later. She leaned out her Lexus window, sunglasses on, jaw tight. "This is illegal," she said. "Nope," I replied, holding up the county map. "I own this land. You blocked my easement, so I made a new one. Want to dispute it in court," she scowled. "You're extorting us." "No," I said. "I'm charging tolls. It's called business. Would you like a receipt?" She drove off without paying. I waited. 3 days later, she was back, this time on foot, waving a stack of papers at me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I didn't doubt that. But what she didn't know was that I'd already started digging into the HOA's finances. And what I found was enough to make Tiffany wish she'd just left my damn road alone. I parked the county assessor's files across the passenger seat and stared out at the Ridgemont Hills clubhouse. My hands were still stained with grease from repairing the winch gate, but I'd rather show up looking like I worked for a living than wear the plastic smile those board members seemed to rehearse. Inside, the monthly HOA meeting was already underway. I walked through the double doors, ignoring the looks, and took a seat in the back row, still holding the manila folder that had kept me up the past 3 nights. The agenda was a joke. New flower beds for the entrance sign. Discussion on mailbox uniformity. Then a line at the bottom. Private road encroachment issue. My name wasn't listed, but I didn't need it to be. Tiffany stood behind the podium in a navy blazer, thinner than ever, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She tapped her gavel once, like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. We've received complaints regarding an unauthorized toll structure installed on what was previously a shared community access lane. The HOA intends to pursue legal action to ensure community access is restored. I stood up. You mean the land I legally purchased and improved after you poured concrete across my original easement? Eyes turned. Some residents looked confused, others annoyed. A few, mostly older folks near the back, looked amused. You're not recognized, Tiffany snapped. I'm not here for recognition. I'm here for transparency. She stiffened. You're disrupting an official meeting. I held up the folder. You want disruption. Let's talk about the $15,000 you allocated last quarter for landscaping consultation to a company that doesn't even have a business license in this state. Murmurs rippled across the room. A man in a red flannel leaned forward. Wait, what? I pulled out the invoice. Same company that used to be registered to your cousin, Tiffany, suspended 3 years ago, but somehow you've been cutting them checks for work no one's seen. Tiffany's voice dropped. That's a serious accusation. I've got more. You want to hear about the golf cart the HOA purchased for grounds inspection? It's stored in your garage and your son's been driving it to school. A board member 2 seats down from Tiffany, an older woman with a sun hat and clipboard, turned visibly pale. That's not, Tiffany began. Then there's the security camera fund, $6,000 for a system that was never installed. But the receipt shows installation happened 3 months ago by a company that shares an address with the landscaping firm. I laid the photocopies on the table in front of the podium. You want to talk unauthorized use of property? Let's talk about embezzlement. The room was quiet enough to hear the ceiling fan creak. You're out of order, Tiffany said, her voice shaking now. I've already spoken with Detective Harlan at the county sheriff's office. He's reviewing the financials you submitted with the annual report. He's also very interested in why the HOA's legal filings keep using a revoked business registration number. Someone stood up. A man in a tracksuit with a clipboard. I motioned to suspend the board until an audit is completed. Another resident, a woman in denim overalls, raised her hand. Seconded. Tiffany's mouth opened, then closed again. Her gavel hovered in the air but didn't drop. I turned to leave. You wanted to play hardball. You forgot I was raised by a contractor who kept every receipt since 1974. Outside, the sky was turning the kind of blue that only shows up after a storm. I climbed into my truck, flipped through the folder one last time, then set it on the passenger seat. The evidence was solid, and I had a feeling the sheriff's office would dig up even more than I had. The following morning, I installed a new keypad on the toll gate, this time with remote access. Not for control, but for the emergency vehicles I'd coordinated with the county to give priority entry. I'd already met with Fire Chief Dillon. Once he saw what the HOA had done to the original easement, he filed a complaint with the zoning board. Turns out, blocking a fire access route without municipal approval is a felony-level offense. By the end of the week, the county had issued a temporary restraining order against the HOA board. Tiffany and her crew weren't allowed to make decisions, spend funds, or file legal action until the investigation was complete. That Friday, I was working on rewiring the gate's solar battery when a battered white Ford pulled into my driveway. The door opened, and a short man in his 60s stepped out, wearing a tan baseball cap and holding a battered clipboard. Name's Reggie, he said. Used to be on the HOA board. Back when it was just 10 houses and a gravel loop. I wiped my hands and nodded. You here to yell at me or help? He chuckled. I've been watching what you've been doing. and I got a box in my garage with every HOA meeting minute from 1986 through 98 back when things were honest. Thought you might want it. Inside the box were handwritten notes, old budgets, and original bylaws showing how the HOA was only ever supposed to manage the pool and 2 cul-de-sacs. No authority over private roads, no expansion into adjacent lots, no power to fine for imagined violations. I spent that weekend scanning every page, labeling each with date and board member signatures. Monday morning, I emailed the whole archive to the county investigator, along with a list of residents willing to testify. The tides turned fast after that. Tiffany's Lexus disappeared from her driveway for 3 straight days. A sheriff's cruiser parked outside the HOA clubhouse one morning, and neighbors stood on their porches watching as 2 officers carried out boxes of files. Within 2 weeks, the county attorney filed charges: misuse of HOA funds, falsified public records, and obstruction of emergency access infrastructure. Tiffany resigned. So did 3 other board members. The rest went quiet. It didn't end with criminal charges. Residents, newly emboldened, filed a petition to dissolve the existing HOA charter. They needed 60% of homeowners to sign. By the end of the month, they had 74. The newly formed neighborhood council, volunteer only, no dues, no fines, asked me to speak at the first meeting. I wasn't interested in politics, but I stood up front with Reggie and told the truth. Abuse of power only works when no one pushes back. They clapped. Not because I was some kind of hero, but because they realized they could do it too. I kept the toll gate, but I removed the fee. Now it opens automatically for any resident, emergency vehicle, or delivery truck. Just not for people trying to run the neighborhood like their personal fiefdom. I still work on my truck every weekend. Still keep the easement clear. Only difference is now when I pass neighbors on the road, they wave, and the concrete slab the HOA poured across my old access road, I had it hauled off. Beneath it, I planted a row of pecan trees. I figure they'll take a few years to grow. But they'll last a lot longer than Tiffany's clipboard empire ever did. A month after the HOA board collapsed, the real mess started to surface. I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, sorting receipts for gravel deliveries, when a black SUV with government plates rolled up my driveway. 2 men stepped out, one in a gray windbreaker with County Fraud Investigations Unit stitched on the chest, the other wearing a badge clipped to his belt and a folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Kane," the man with the badge asked. I nodded. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about the Ridgemont Hills HOA and their filings with the county over the past 2 years. I motioned toward the workshop. "You're probably going to want a table for what I've got." Inside, I laid out everything I hadn't already turned in. The printouts Tiffany thought no one would double-check, the trail of disbursements funneled through defunct shell companies, and the handwritten notes that Reggie's box had unearthed, the ones showing board votes that never actually happened. The investigator leafed through a stack of budget printouts, pausing on one labeled Emergency Landscape Drainage Study. "This one's interesting," he muttered. "You know what a drainage study is typically used for?" I shook my head. "Laundering. It's vague enough that no one asks for proof. Especially if the board claims it was urgent." He pulled out a county map and pointed to a vacant hillside just east of the Ridgemont clubhouse. "They claimed a landslide risk here," he said, "filed a permit to stabilize it. But the land isn't HOA property, it's privately owned by a woman named June Cardenas. She never requested anything, and the firm listed on the invoice, registered in Nevada, dissolved last year." The other man added, "We ran the routing numbers. That payment bounced through 3 different banks before landing in a Cayman Islands account tied to a holding company. That company's secretary of record, Tiffany Keller." I leaned back against the workbench. "So it's bigger than just a couple landscaping invoices." "Much bigger," the agent said. "This wasn't just embezzlement. It's wire fraud, misuse of public filings, obstruction of municipal oversight, and property misrepresentation." I handed him a file I hadn't shared with anyone yet. An anonymous envelope had shown up in my mailbox the week before. No return address. Inside were HOA meeting minutes typed and signed, but never distributed publicly. The documents outlined a secret vote to divert over $25,000 from the Community Improvement Fund into a litigation reserve. But no litigation ever happened. That money vanished. The agent scanned the page. "We've been trying to find this. This memo was listed in a subpoenaed email chain but redacted." He looked up. "Do you know who sent this to you?" "I've got a guess," I said, thinking of the quiet woman down on Cedar Hollow who'd stopped making eye contact at the mailbox ever since Tiffany went under. They took the documents, promised to keep me informed, and left without fanfare. 3 days later, a moving van showed up outside Tiffany's home. She wasn't there. 2 deputies stood on the porch talking to a man in a tie who looked very uncomfortable. Later, the local paper ran a small headline: "Former HOA president under criminal investigation for financial misconduct." It didn't name names, but anyone in Ridgemont Hills knew exactly who it meant. By the following week, new revelations started surfacing. The HOA had filed false maintenance reports for years, claiming to inspect storm drains, repave sidewalks, and trim trees that didn't even exist. A retired city planner who lived 2 blocks over brought his own records to the county. He'd served on the zoning board for decades, and none of the work orders the HOA had submitted matched permits on file. But what blew the whole thing wide open came from a place no one expected: the title office. I was replacing the alternator on my neighbor's Jeep when a woman in a red jacket pulled up in a county vehicle and asked for me by name. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding a manila envelope. Inside was a deed transfer dated 6 months before the toll road saga began. It showed that the HOA had attempted to take ownership of a 20-foot wide strip of common land that bordered my original easement. The problem? That land was still under a conservation easement granted by the county decades ago. It couldn't be sold, built on, or altered in any way. The forged transfer had a signature from a board member who'd passed away 2 years before the date on the form. "That's not just fraud," the woman said. "That's felony-level document tampering. And because it interfered with a conservation easement, it violates federal environmental protection law." It explained everything: why they poured concrete over the road, why they tried to force me out. They thought no one would notice a forged signature buried in the county archives. They needed control of that land to justify cutting off my access, and they gambled no one would dig deep enough to find out how they got it. But I had. Later that month, a federal investigator joined the case. The HOA's financials were officially frozen. Tiffany's assets were seized. One board member tried to flee the state. He was intercepted at the airport. Another cut a deal in exchange for testimony and confirmed what we'd all suspected. This wasn't about roads or landscaping. It was a real estate play. The HOA had been quietly preparing to rezone a patch of greenbelt adjacent to the blocked road. With my easement out of the way, they planned to lease it to a developer, a company Tiffany's brother just happened to be listed as a consultant for. That land was supposed to be protected. But with the right bribes, the right signatures, and the right cover story: fire hazard mitigation, community safety upgrades, non-compliant access routes, they nearly stole it from under everyone's feet. When the indictments came down, they hit hard: wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to defraud a public agency, and environmental easement violation, a federal offense with real prison time attached. It was a strange thing, watching the neighborhood I'd lived in my whole life turn into a cautionary tale. News vans came and went. Local reporters set up outside the clubhouse like it was City Hall. People who never used to wave now stopped by to ask how it all started. I told them the truth. It started with a road, not revenge, not politics, just a road that they had no right to block. The new neighborhood council, the one formed after the HOA was dismantled, held a vote to rename the old easement. They called it Heritage Way. I didn't ask for it, but I appreciated the gesture. One afternoon, I got a call from a paralegal at the county attorney's office. She said they were closing the case's preliminary investigation phase and wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify when the trials began. I said yes. Not because I wanted to punish Tiffany more than she already had been, but because people needed to see what happens when power gets handed to the wrong kind of people, the ones who think rules are for everyone else. The trials were scheduled for spring. But in the meantime, the gate still stood. I never put the fee back, didn't need to. Because now, when people passed through, they knew what it had cost to keep that road open. And more importantly, they knew how close they'd come to losing a lot more than pavement. The first pretrial hearing was scheduled on a gray Tuesday morning, and by sunrise, half the neighborhood lined the courthouse steps. I stood quietly near the back entrance, holding a leather folder of documents the county prosecutor had requested. Not just receipts and maps this time, but sworn declarations from former HOA members who'd come forward after the indictments dropped. The kind of people who had once stayed silent out of fear of retaliation, but were now ready to speak. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of reporters, attorneys, and residents squeezed into every available seat. The judge, a tall man with a slight limp and a voice that didn't need a gavel, called the session to order. Tiffany sat at the defense table, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they charged by the breath. She didn't look up once. The prosecutor, a woman named Daria Lind, walked to the center of the room. Her tone was calm but deliberate. We will show that the Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association knowingly submitted forged land transfers, laundered funds through illegitimate corporate fronts, and falsified public records to obscure their plan, to unlawfully strip property rights from individual residents for personal financial gain. She turned toward the judge. And we will present evidence that this was not a disorganized scheme. It was calculated, sustained, and coordinated over a period of 18 months. The defense launched into a tired argument about administrative confusion, volunteer board incompetence, and community miscommunication. But the judge cut them off halfway through a sentence. "Save it for trial," he said. Outside the courthouse, a local news crew caught me on the sidewalk. I didn't say much, just that I hoped everyone involved would be held accountable and that the residents deserved better. That afternoon, I drove back home and found a man in a hunting vest waiting near the toll gate. He had a clipboard in one hand and a rolled-up blueprint in the other. "Your cane?" he asked. "Depends who's asking," he grinned. "Name's Ellis, County Infrastructure Planning. We're drawing up a proposal to formally designate this strip as a certified emergency access route. If you're interested, the county's offering an easement partnership. They'll maintain the surface, cover drainage, and keep it plowed in winter. You still keep ownership, but it's protected from future interference." I leaned against the fence. "Protected how? Once it's recorded as emergency infrastructure, no private organization can alter, obstruct, or reroute it without going through the county and a fire safety review board. Including HOAs." I held out my hand. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, the county surveyors arrived with orange flags and GPS rigs. They marked every bend, every culvert, and every drainage slope. The road was measured, logged, and certified on the books. I even got a small metal placard to mount at the end. "Designated Emergency Egress Route Protected Access." Meanwhile, the cleanup back in Ridgemont Hills began. The interim neighborhood council held its first open forum in the community rec hall. It was the first time in years that every seat was filled without the threat of fines or citations looming overhead. People brought folding chairs. One guy brought cookies. Another brought a projector and displayed a slideshow of all the HOA's improvement projects that had never actually existed. Then a woman stood up, mid-50s, wore hiking boots and a windbreaker, and held a small manila envelope. "My name's Sharon," she said. I was the HOA's treasurer for 6 months before I resigned. I didn't know what they were doing at first. But when I asked for access to the full financials, Tiffany told me the files were being consolidated for audit prep. She pulled out a paper. This is a statement from a bank account opened in the HOA's name, but never disclosed on the annual budget. It's where the landscaping invoices were paid from. But look, here's a charge for a hotel in Palm Springs. Here's a boutique clothing store, and here this is a payment to a private security firm for surveillance. People leaned forward. They used HOA funds to pay a company to monitor specific residents. I asked for the report. It listed names. One of them was mine. The room went dead silent. I watched as a quiet anger settled across the group, not the kind that yells or rants, the kind that organizes. The council voted that night to permanently dissolve the HOA's legal charter. They filed the paperwork with the state housing authority the next day. Without a charter, the HOA no longer existed in the eyes of the law. The bank accounts were frozen, the fines nullified, and the board's power ended for good. But the real reckoning came 6 weeks later. The federal case wrapped faster than anyone expected. The evidence was overwhelming. Tiffany was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for document fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction. 2 other board members received similar sentences. One struck a plea deal in exchange for restitution and community service. And the land, the strip they tried to seize under the forged transfer. The county reclassified it as protected conservation space. It would never be developed ever. The zoning board even placed a permanent restriction on the parcel, naming it a community integrity buffer zone. I'd never heard of that before. Apparently, neither had anyone else. But it had a nice ring to it. A few days after the sentencing, Reggie came by with a small wooden box. Inside was a brass plaque. "Thought you might want to hang this at the gate," he said, the plaque read, "in honor of the residents who stood their ground. And the road that couldn't be stolen." I hung it just below the keypad. After everything settled, I started noticing things I hadn't seen in years. Kids riding bikes again, using the newly opened trail that ran behind the rec center. Elderly neighbors walking their dogs without being told their leash was non-compliant. Someone even painted a mural on the side of the old clubhouse, a bright, sprawling scene of trees, hills, and a winding road cutting through open land. They asked me to add something to it. I drew a small truck at the bottom, just off the gravel path, didn't need to sign it. Everyone knew whose it was. The toll gate still stands, but it hasn't been locked in months. It opens automatically for every car now. Not because I need it to, but because it's no longer a barrier, it's a reminder. A reminder that no matter how deep the corruption goes, it only takes one person with enough stubborn resolve, a stack of old maps, and a few good neighbors to bring it all down. The trees are taller now along the new easement. The pecans I planted where the old road used to be are starting to bloom. I don't mind the slow growth. Some things take time to root, especially freedom, but once they do, they don't shake loose easily. And in this town, no one's pouring concrete across anyone's rights ever again.